The historical grammatical interpretation. This is the interpretation that we as Christians seek in our study of God's Word, whether we're trying to determine the meaning of a word, a phrase, a passage, or perhaps some ancient custom that we're unfamiliar with. In this video, we're going to discover the reason why Moses shattered the two stone tablets at the foot of Mount Sinai, which is recorded in Exodus 32. What we're going to find is that in the ancient world, the shattering of stone tablets, such as the ones that Moses shattered, signified the end of some sort of agreement, like a marriage, a sale of some form of property, or a covenant. And so a parallel would be something like this. A man and a woman join together in holy matrimony and go down to the county recorder's office and obtain a marriage license and exchange vows. The only thing left now is the marriage or the wedding ceremony. But the night before the wedding, one of the parties proves unfaithful. And now the victimized party can either say, I'll go through with the wedding, or can say, tear the marriage license up and say, this marriage is not going any further. And so what happens is the marriage will be annulled as if it never happened. And this is a modern day example of what happened that faithful day is recorded in the book of Exodus chapter 32, with the covenant that we read about in Exodus chapters 20 through 24. So the results will be is that what we're going to do is this. We're going to begin with the Word of God, and we're going to look at two Old Testament passages, Exodus 32, and we're going to go to one of the minor prophets, which will shed abundant light upon the text. And once we establish a solid interpretation, then and only then will we go outside of the scriptures, and we will look to the writings of ancient Israel's neighboring contemporaries. And we will use them as an interpretive tool, much the way we use the writings of Flavius Josephus to interpret things that are recorded in the Gospels and in the book of Acts. Thanks to Flavius Josephus's writings, we know a whole lot now about the particulars of crucifixion. And so we won't be doing anything new. After this, it's going to confirm our interpretation. And what will have happened is we will have established the historical, grammatical interpretation which we seek as Christians. As a result of this, the principles for application are going to rise to the surface, and we will be able to apply the principles from this symbolic act of Moses to our lives today in the 21st century. And we can also apply it to the rest of our theology, because now we've learned something new concerning the law in Exodus. So as a result, what we're going to discover is that the shattering of stone tablets in the ancient world in which Israel dwelt is the modern day equivalent of tearing up a contract. That's right. It's the modern day equivalent of tearing up a contract. So without further delay, let us look to the word of the Lord and pursue this examination. So we all know the story. We're going to begin with Exodus 32, 19 and 20. And the Israelites have grown impatient with waiting for Moses. And so they're committing spiritual adultery and worshiping the golden calf. So now I'll be reading verses 19 and 20 of Exodus chapter 32, which reads, "And it came about as soon as Moses came near the camp, that he saw the calf and the dancing, and Moses' anger burned, and he threw the tablets from his hands and scattered them at the foot of the mountain." Verse 20, "He took the calf which they had made and burned it with fire, and ground it to powder, and scattered it over the surface of the water, and made the sons of Israel drink it." Now, Moses is often portrayed as being a man prone to anger, and he has been depicted as a man who shattered the two stone tablets out of anger. Well, although the text does state that he was angry, it nowhere ever states that the reason why he shattered the tablets is because he was angry. No, instead, I'm going to say suspend judgment on that momentarily. So here Moses goes down to the foot of Mount Sinai and shatters the two stone tablets. Well, in the ancient world, the shattering of stone tablets signified the end of some sort of agreement. This is widespread, common knowledge, as we would say, the past 70 years. But now, like I said earlier, we're going to look to another Old Testament passage, one of the minor prophets. And what I want to do is a comparison with Zechariah chapter 11, verses 10 through 14, is going to shed abundant light on the significance of Moses shattering the two stone tablets here. And the reason why I've chosen Zechariah is because there are 3 points of contact between Exodus 32 and Zechariah 11. Number one, both passages are, or both texts are passages of judgment. Secondly, both passages contain the concept of impatience. In Exodus here, the people have grown impatient in waiting for Moses. And so they ask Aaron to construct a golden calf. In Zechariah, Yahweh has grown impatient with the people. The third point of contact is in both passages, an object or two, in Zechariah, 2 objects are shattered. Here in Exodus 32, a set of tablets are shattered. So with that, we're going to look to Zechariah's text. Here in Zechariah is summoned to impersonate the Messiah. And so Zechariah here is the speaker, but he's impersonating the Messiah. Verse 10 reads, I took my staff, favor, and cut it in pieces to break my covenant which I had made with all the peoples. Verse 11. So it was broken on that day, and the afflicted of the flock who were watching me realized that it was the word of Yahweh. Verse 14, we drop down to verse 14. Then I cut in pieces my second staff, union, to break the brotherhood between Judah and Israel. Now notice here, I don't normally teach a passage or a text without considering the context in which it occurs. But I have lived in this passage for a number of years, and so what I'm going to argue here is not going to change by what I am omitting. So despite me not bringing in the other the verses that come before and after this, it's not going to alter what I'm arguing here. So now notice we're focusing on the 2 highlighted yellow words, cut. We're not looking at break, broken, or break yet. We're going to look first of all at the word highlighted in yellow, cut. The word cut here is the Hebrew word gadah, and it carries either the meaning cut or shatter or break. Now in Exodus, Moses used the word shabar. Notice how they're almost synonymous. Shabar carries the meaning shatter or break. So it makes very little difference that Moses did not use the same word here that Zechariah does. For example, car, truck, bus. They're not synonyms, but they're all modes of transportation. So in that sense, there's substantial overlap in meaning. And similarly here with gadah and shabar. They're not synonyms, but there's substantial overlap in meaning. Okay, now we're going to turn our attention to the word translated break, broken, and break in red there. Those words there, break and broken, represent the Hebrew word parar. And this is a key word here because parar can carry the meaning either to violate, and you have some examples there, and they're not limited to those, or it can carry the meaning to cancel, to terminate, to annul, to abolish, and you have some examples there. And again, it's not limited to those examples. There are a number of examples in the Old Testament. Now, how do we know which meaning it carries here? Well, it's easy. Since we know that the Messiah would never violate a covenant. Therefore, the context demands that parar here be understood to mean to carry the meaning of to cancel, to terminate, to annul, or to abolish here. And so because the people have violated the covenant, Yahweh is forced to abolish that which has already been violated, the covenant. So here you have 2 examples. Zechariah breaks 2 staffs. Moses shattered one set of tablets. But here in Zechariah, you have two examples signifying the end of some sort of agreement. Similarly, in Exodus, the shattering of the two stone tablets signified the end of an agreement there. And that was the agreement to enter into the covenant, which they never did. And like I said at the beginning, in the introduction, this is similar to the wedding night before the wedding ceremony. Israel's playing the harlot and has become unfaithful. And now Yahweh could either go on, wink at it, overlook it, or he could smash the tablets and annul the covenant as if it never happened, because the covenant was never established in Exodus. And we'll look at that in more detail towards the end of this video. But here, so now we have three examples: the set of stone tablets and the two staffs. Now the result of this in Exodus, now we see the meaning that the shattering of an object in the ancient world carries. And so because Moses fully intended to go down and tear up the contract, as it were, shattering the two stone tablets, signifying that the covenant was annulled, as if it never happened. In the ancient world, like I said, the shattering of stone tablets signified the end of some sort of agreement. In Exodus, it was the agreement to enter into a covenant, which they never made it. In Zechariah, it signified the abolishment or the termination of a covenant that already existed. So in both cases, the shattering of stone tablets or the cutting up of two staffs is the modern day equivalent of tearing up a contract. In Zechariah, the first staff signified that the covenant was coming to an end. The second staff was the end of the brotherhood between Israel and Judah, because now they were going to be carried out into captivity. So there we have three examples of the shattering or the cutting up of an object signifying the end of an agreement or a covenant. Now, like I said, now that we've established a cogent interpretation using only the scriptures, now we're going to go outside of Israel and we're going to look to the writings of ancient Israel's neighboring contemporaries and use them as an interpretive tool, much the way we use the writings of Josephus to understand some of the particulars of crucifixion and things that are recorded in the Gospel and the book of Acts. So we're going to go first to the Law of Hammurabi. The Law of Hammurabi, line 128, reads, if a signer acquired a wife, but did not draw up the contracts for her, that woman is no wife. Notice that it's in plural, not singular. That's because in the ancient world, when there was a marriage, there were two copies of the marriage license or certificate or contract. Therefore, if one of the parties proved unfaithful, committed adultery, then the victimized party could shatter their personal copy of the contract. And so now we have the mounting evidence rises to four. We have Moses, two in Zechariah, and now one here with Hammurabi. We're going to look at one other example from the Law of Hammurabi. This was taken from line 37. This one reads, if a signer has purchased a field, orchard, or house belonging to a soldier, a commissary, or a feudatory, his contract tablet shall be broken, and he shall also forfeit his money, with the field, orchard, or house reverting to its owner. Notice what he calls the tablet, a contract tablet. This demonstrates my point here that in the ancient world, stone tablets were viewed as contract tablets that were legally binding, and they functioned much like modern day contracts do today. So now you have four shattered objects signifying the end or termination of some sort of agreement. In Exodus, the agreement to enter into a covenant, which they never made it. And now you have two in Zechariah, and here you have one, like I said at the outset, There was for marriages, sale of some form of property, as it is here, and a covenant in Zechariah. Last of all, we're going to look at our next one. This one comes from Al-Alaq, the land of the Hittites, Hadi. It's a rather lengthy one, so I'm not going to read the entire thing. I'm only going to give you a summary of how it reads. You can see here, first of all, I want to point out that the blue and the red highlighted words signify the legal terminology. The red specifically dealing specifically with the tablets themselves. So here, this was by a man named Abael, who bought a house, a field, and an orchard, and he went to court, and the court officials listened to his complaint, and the judges break his tablet without a formal hearing. And so what he does is he seeks another court official and appeals to him for assistance. And so, but it gives you an idea how stone tablets of the type that Moses shattered, how they function. They function just like modern day contracts do today. Now, I suggest that you pause the video, read it for yourself, or at the conclusion, come back and read it. Notice the legal terminology. But again, this is your fifth example where an object, this time stone tablet, is shattered, and it signifies the end of some sort of agreement. This is crystal clear. Now we have established the all-important historical, grammatical interpretation of Exodus 32:19, Moses shattering the two stone tablets. This is very valuable to us as believers. Now, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to give you the reference. You can see where I got it from. J.G. Finkelstein, Some New Misharim Material and Its Implication, 1965. Studies in honor of Benno Landsberger on his 75th birthday. But now what we're going to do is we're going to go and I'm going to demonstrate what I was saying at the outset of this video in the introduction, that the covenant that we read about in Exodus never got established. And here's why I say it. First of all, that's point number one. The shattering of an object signifies in the Old Testament the end of some sort of agreement, either a marriage, a sale of some property, or a covenant. And the same was true in the ancient Near East and Mesopotamia and Egypt. In Egypt, the pharaohs are seen casting a pot, pronouncing judgment on Assyria or some foreign country. So shattering in an object doesn't have to be a tablet. It could be an object. But now we're going to look to what I was talking about earlier. And here's what you have in Exodus. Here's one of the main reasons why I say this is the scriptural evidence that the covenant that we read about in Exodus was never established. It never got off the ground. Look at, they received laws. And on the left, you'll see the 7 elements of a covenant or a treaty in the ancient world. Laws, the invocation of witnesses, blessings and curses, and so forth. The invocation of witnesses were called to act as viewers who would confirm that there was a pact being made, a treaty or a covenant. And then the lesser party had to recite the blessings and the curses, the blessings for obedience and the curses for disobedience. And then they had to swear oaths. And then fourth of all, they had to deposit the 2 stone tablets into the ark. And then there was threatened curses for tampering with the treaty document. You see, a treaty document tablet was a legal document, and a covenant was a legal institution. Last of all, the periodic reading of the law was given. The instructions to do this every year or every 3 years or every 7 years, depending on the covenant. So here, these are missing in the covenant recorded in Exodus. These are required elements of a covenant. Certain procedures had to be followed formally, formal procedures. All of these 7 elements, they needed to be done formally. There were rituals. And so you notice at the top, the brown signifies the only ones that they fulfilled, the laws. the lines with the red arrows, but that's what's missing in the book of Exodus. That's why, together with the twofold point that I'm making here, is that the shattering of the two stone tablets and what's lacking in Exodus is proof positive from the scriptures that the covenant recorded in Exodus was never established. Now, count them. They only received 4 laws. In Exodus, Israel only received 4 laws, nothing else. Now, I'm going to show you something in direct contrast, because Israel was without a covenant for approximately 46 years through the wilderness wandering period and until the day that they entered the promised land and conquered the inhabitants of the land and ran them out of there, most of them, but not all of them. And then they set up and they had their ceremony there. In direct contrast to the Exodus covenant, they never got off the ground. Take a look at this. In Deuteronomy, look at how Deuteronomy has every single one of them, all 7 elements of a covenant. Look at the verses there. God, since he could swear on nobody higher than himself, he summons heaven and earth to serve as cosmic witnesses, recorded in Deuteronomy 30:19 and 31:28. The blessings and curses are there. In fact, the curses occupy chapter 28, verse 15 through 68. I mean, there's more curses there for disobedience than there are for blessings. And then the oaths were sworn. And then this is beautiful here. The 2 stone tablets were deposited into the ark. You see the instructions there in Deuteronomy 10:1 through 5 and so forth. The second set of stone tablets made it into the ark. They found a home. The first set never made it because Yahweh told Moses, "Arise, go down there, because your people whom you brought out of Egypt have corrupted themselves." Prior to this, in Exodus 19, Yahweh acknowledged that he brought them out of here, out of Egypt. But here he virtually disowns them and says, "You brought them. I'm done with them." And then sixth of all, the threatened curses for tampering with the treaty document. All of this was there. The covenant documents had to be present on site. So the conclusion here is that all the elements of a covenant, in other words, the one in Deuteronomy, in the promise that was fully established. All of these is what Exodus is lacking. And this is why I say it's beyond words. I really don't have to say anything. If you just look at the chart, it teaches that the covenant in Exodus never got established. It was annulled before it ever got started, like that wedding that wedding ceremony that I mentioned the night before. Israel plays the harlot, and Yahweh, who's depicted as the husband in the Old Testament, you can see this in Hosea chapter 3. You see it in Isaiah 50 verses 1 and 2. Yahweh is depicted as the husband, Israel the wife. Carried over in the New Testament, Christ is the husband, and the church is the bride. Now, if you think this is revolutionary, the shattering of the 2 stone tablets signifying that the covenant recorded in Exodus never got off the ground, was never established, it was annulled before it ever finished, I have something else for you. The implications that I talked about at the beginning of the introduction, before the slide presentation here, I mentioned we would touch on them just briefly. The implications are this: you have 2 Mosaic law covenants, Exodus and Deuteronomy. I didn't invent this. There are actually 13 reputable Hebrew scholars in the past 200 years who have held to this view. I didn't come up with this in my own mind. I saw it, I learned it, and I thought, hey, this is what I'm seeing. And then I started digging and digging. Gleason Archer is one example. I'll leave that. Gleason Archer was a highly conservative Hebrew scholar of the highest order, a polished scholar. He held to it. Now, I was sharing this with a friend one time, and he says to me, "But now, does the scriptures ever say that there were 2 covenants?" And I said, "You better believe it." Here's Exodus 29:1. These are the words of the covenant which Yahweh commanded Moses to make with the sons of Israel in the land of Moab, besides the covenant which he made with them at Horeb. He made two covenants with Israel. One of them was annulled. The other one was fully established in the promised land. And let me explain a little bit what Moab is and what Horeb is. Mount Sinai stands here. Horeb was the first one, is southwest on the Egypt side, southwest. Moab is northeast, going right before you get into the promised land. So there are two sides of the mountain. So yes, two, not one, but two Mosaic law covenants. I mention that to people and they look at me like I'm crazy. But what do the scriptures teach? The verdict demands two Mosaic law covenants. Now, I talked about implications, not one implication. There are a couple other ones. One other one that we'll discuss in ensuing videos. The other one, and you might laugh at this one, but you should know by now, don't doubt me. I just showed from the scriptures that the covenant recorded in Exodus never got off the ground. I just showed you that there were two Mosaic law covenants. And before I said it, you probably thought, there's no way. You probably laughed to yourself. Well, now I'm going to leave you with this. Down the road in ensuing videos, we're going to look at the new 10 commandments. That's right, the new 10 commandments. But for now, I hope that this video was a benefit to you. The shattering of stone tablets in the ancient world is the modern day equivalent of tearing up a contract.